Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be taking a lot of different cross training shoes and comparing their sizing to one another. So on all of my roundup training shoe content, I constantly get asked, how does this shoe fit compared to this one? Is this shoe wide? Is this shoe narrow? Is the length true? And so in this video, I'm basically going to provide you with a bunch of specs regarding every shoe's sizing. I'm going to list the shoes from most narrow to most wide, relatively speaking, and in that way you can jump around this video too and get the info you need and get out of here. So everything is down there, timestamp below, because I am going to go through a quite lengthy intro to explain how to get your right measurements for your foot and how to size your shoes accordingly. But that being said, let's go ahead and answer the question, does size actually matter? So when it comes to training shoes and sizing them accordingly, that is a very individual process. And so I wanted to put this video together for two key reasons. Number one, at TF2 and with my brand, I'm always trying to save you time and save you money. And so if you can get your sizing right the first time when looking into a new shoe, then you don't have to go through the return process. Then you don't have to return it and go with a different model because it didn't fit right. And that is something that I'm always trying to be a little bit better at. Granted, it's really difficult to do because we're all individual, but hopefully this video can provide further context into how shoes will fit compared to one another. The second reason I wanted to put this video together is because we're all buying things online way more these days. A lot of stores aren't going to carry Reebok Nano 12s. Some stores won't carry the Under Armour TriBase Reign 4. No stores carry the Rad 1. Few stores carry the Inov-8 F-Lite G 300, and this list goes on, don't even get me started. And so if you can get a better idea of your foot's length, your foot's width, how much upper you need in your shoe based on your foot thickness, your arch height, etc., you can then cross-reference all these data points with a company sizing chart to then make a more strategic call for your needs. Because every company will vary a little bit with their sizing based on the last they use. I don't get why we can't just standardize this, but because of this variance, it can be really difficult then to go from one company to another and expect the shoe to fit the exact same. So this video, once again, is going to have multiple data points. I'm going to have the length of the shoe, the width of the shoe. I'm going to share some thoughts on the upper based on if it's low, fair, or high. I'm then going to share thoughts on the taper of the toe box, whether it's a harsh taper, whether it's a little bit more rounded and anatomical. Hopefully all these data points can then give you a better idea of how a shoe fits. But now let's talk about how to actually measure your foot to size it accordingly for a shoe. All right, so to get your foot's sizing, you're gonna need four things. You will need a piece of paper, a pen, pencil, marker, whatever you prefer, a measuring tape, and then a good old wall to put your heel against. Okay, so now once you have your paper and pen and marker, whatever you have, put your heel against the wall, put the paper flush with the wall as well. What you're gonna do is come down here off that big toe, make a little mark here, try to go as accurate as you can, and then on the width of the forefoot here, so at the base of the forefoot, so the widest point of your foot, you're gonna make a little mark as well. Boom. Boom. And two quick and underrated tips here is number one, when you do this, do it at the end of your day. Your foot's going to expand over time as you put more weight into them. So throughout your day, your feet will expand and get a little bit bigger. And then also, I would highly suggest doing this in the socks you train most normally in. Your sock thickness can influence how a shoe fits. So I often wear these thin no-show socks. They're super cheap off Amazon, cost efficient. They work really well, last a few months. So these are the socks I normally train in. So I did my measurements in them. And once we've made our marks on our paper, we're then gonna measure out our length and width. So from the base of the paper, so essentially where the heel was making contact with the wall, we'll measure length. I have a length of about 10.75 inches. Looking at the width of my foot, we have a width of about 3.85 inches, if not just at 4 inches. And note that is with a sock on. So that is adding a little bit of thickness to the overall shape of my foot. And then from here, what you can do is look, and if you want, you can mark like where your toes basically land. So if you have a more anatomical shaped foot when it comes to your toe anatomy, that will be a little bit wider throughout the tip of your shoe. And then if it's a little bit more tapered, you will have a slightly more aggressive angle. But that is something that you're gonna have to look at on your own. That isn't necessarily something I could tell you, and there is no perfect shape here. So that is something that you can take a note of. So as I go through the toe box construction and the shapes of each shoe's toe box, you can then hopefully get a better idea of how a shoe will fit for your foot anatomy. So before I dive into all the shoes and their sizing differences, I want to quickly touch on three things. Number one, when it comes to the length and width of every shoe, those are slightly more objective data points in nature. However, do note there can be a little bit of deviation there when it comes to a couple of millimeters due to human error, aka this guy making errors. The second point is that when it comes to the toe box shape and construction and the upper volume of the shoes, those are subjective data points. So I'm drawing on the opinions of how certain shoes fit from one another and how I interpret those. So please note that those can have a little bit of variance based on how we all interact with different shoes. So there is a little bit more subjectivity to those data points. The third point is, how should a training shoe fit your foot? So that's where you're gonna have a little bit of variance there, and there's not really a one size fits all answer here. So what I would suggest doing is look at a training shoe that you currently have and you enjoy, measure how much room you have at the end of your toe box, and then use that as a gauge for sizing your next pair accordingly. If you don't necessarily have a training shoe that you currently like, or if you're brand new to training shoes, I would say start working with a range of like 0.3 to 0.6 inches of space at the end of your toe box. If you like a snugger fit, go towards the lower end of the range. If you like a little bit more room at the end of your toe box, go towards the larger end of the range. There's going to be a lot of preference when it comes to comfort and how you train in there. So do note that I like to use a range when it comes to how much room you should have in your toe box, because everybody will be slightly different in that context. All right, so now looking at the New Balance Minimus TR, this model also doesn't have a removable insole or even an insole that I could pry out. So I will do my best to give you an accurate read on the length and width of the shoe. So right about here at the base of the boot, we have a length of about 11 inches in the Minimus TR. And then when looking at the width of this shoe, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. The upper volume in this model sits relatively low, and this model has a pretty harsh, aggressive taper in the toe box. So this model is one of the narrower training shoes on the market, and it's one of the more like form-fitting shoes, especially if you have a nice narrow foot. All right, looking at the Inov-8 F-Lite 230 V3 here of my size 10 model, we have a length of about 10.85 ounces. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.75 inches, if not 3.85 inches. And looking at the upper volume in this shoe, it is pretty low throughout the forefoot and midfoot, and this model does have a pretty aggressive taper through the toe box. All right, so looking at the length of the Inov-8 F-Lite 260 V2 here in my size 10 model, we have a length of about 11 inches. Looking at the width of the 260 V2, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. And then when it comes to the upper volume in this shoe, it does sit relatively low. And then looking at the taper of the toe box, it is a little bit more aggressive in nature with its taper and shape. However, it does widen out a little bit here at the end. However, again, there is a taper to this model's toe box. For the Inov-8 F-Lite G300, for my size 10 model here, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. For the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in the Inov-8 F-Lite G300, it is fair in nature. However, with this TPU midfoot cage, you might find that you're a little bit limited in this model. So if you do have a very thick midfoot, you might not want to go with this option. And then when it comes to the toe box taper, this model is pretty aggressive with the taper through the toe box. All right, so for the Under Armour Project Rock 5, we do not have a removable insole, not even an insole that I can kind of pry out of the shoe, so it does make my life a little bit tougher. So I'm gonna do my best to give you an accurate read on the shoe based on where it looks like the insole finishes with this model. So for my size 10 model here, we have a length of about 11.125 inches, it looks like. Looking at the width of this shoe, we come in at just about 3.75 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in this shoe, I would describe it as pretty low. Through the toe box, you don't get a ton of upper volume. And while this model will stretch out a little bit, I don't think you're gonna get a ton, especially if you have thicker feet. And then when it comes to the taper of the Project Rock 5, it is pretty aggressive through the toe box here with the taper of this shoe. All right, so when looking at the NOBULL Trainer's length in my size 10 model, we have a length of about 11 inches, if not 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of the forefoot here, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. When it comes to the upper volume in this shoe, I would describe it as fair. And then when it comes to the taper, there is a taper through the toe box, but it's not super aggressive in nature. All right, so for the TYR CXT-1 Trainer here, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of the CXT-1 Trainer, we have a width of about 3.65, 3.75 inches. Looking at the upper volume in the CXT-1 Trainer, I would describe this upper volume as fair. It's not super high, but also it doesn't sit super low, and this does stretch out a little bit as you break in this mesh. And then looking at the taper of the shoe's toe box, it isn't the most aggressive, however, there is a pretty substantial taper through the TYR CXT-1 Trainer's toe box here. So looking at the length of my size 10 model here in the On Cloud X, we have a length of about 11.25 inches. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.75 inches, if not 3.85 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in the On Cloud X, I would describe it as low. And then when it comes to the toe box shape, it does have a slightly aggressive taper here through the toe box. All right, so looking at the length of the Under Armour HOVR Rise 4 in my size 10 model here, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of this shoe, we have a width that sits right around 3.75 inches. And looking at the upper volume in this model, I would describe it as fair. This is a booty style shoe, so it will stretch out a little bit. However, it's not going to expand a ton, so this does have a rather fair upper construction through the forefoot and midfoot. And then looking at the taper of the toe box, it is rather aggressive in nature with the taper of this shoe. All right, looking at the Puma Fuse 2's length for my size 10 model. For the length, we have a length of 11.25 inches. For the width of this shoe, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. And looking at the upper volume in this model, it does sit relatively low in nature, especially through the forefoot here. And then looking at the toe box taper, it is rather aggressive in nature with the taper of this shoe's toe box. Okay, looking at the Rad 1, when it comes to length, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. And then when it comes to the width of the Rad 1, we have a width of about 3.75, 3.85 inches. Looking at the upper volume in the Rad 1, I would describe it as fair. It doesn't sit super low, but also you don't have a ton of room through the toe box, and it doesn't stretch out too much after you break this model in. And then when it comes to the taper, this model does have a slightly aggressive taper through the toe box. All right, so looking at the length of my size 10 model here in the Nike Metcon 8, we have a length of about 11.25 inches. Looking at the width of the Metcon 8, we have a width of about 3.85 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in this model, it does sit pretty low. So this will not probably be the best option for custom orthotics or inserts. And the taper of the Nike Metcon 8 is pretty aggressive in nature through the toe box. All right, so looking at the Adidas Dropset Trainer's length here in my size 10 model, we have a length of about 11.25 inches. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.75, if not 3.85 inches. Looking at the upper volume in the Dropset Trainer, it's pretty fair in nature. This mesh will start to stretch and give you a little bit more wiggle room over time, but it isn't super high, especially through the forefoot. And then looking at the taper of this model, it is pretty aggressive in nature with the taper of this shoe's toe box. All right, so looking at the length of the Strike Movement Haze Trainer here, for my size 10 model, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.85 inches, if not 3.75 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in the Haze Trainer, it sits relatively low in nature with this jacquard knit. So if you have custom orthotics or inserts, you might find the toe box to feel a little bit snug in this model regarding its overall volume. And then looking at the taper of the shoe, it isn't super aggressive and it's a little bit more anatomical in nature with the toe box construction. All right, looking at the GORUCK Ballistic Trainer in my size 10 model here, we have a length of 11.25 inches. Looking at the width of the Ballistic Trainer, we have a width of about 3.85 inches. And when it comes to the upper volume in this shoe, you do get a good amount of upper volume, especially the forefoot in this model. And this material will stretch out a little bit over time. And looking at the toe box construction, it's a little bit more anatomical in nature. Now we do have a taper, but it isn't as aggressive as some of the other training shoes on the market. All right, so looking at the length of my size 10 model here in the NOBULL Trainer Plus, for my size 10 model here, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.75 inches. When it comes to the upper volume in the NOBULL Trainer Plus, you do get a good amount of upper volume in this shoe. Now the super fabric will not break in and stretch out a ton over time, so If you don't have enough volume right out of the box with these, you might want to return them if you feel like they're too snug, especially the midfoot or forefoot. And then looking at the taper of the NOBULL Trainer Plus, it is a little bit more anatomical in nature. There's a taper to it, but it does have a slightly more anatomical shape through the base of the midsole here. All right, so looking at the Under Armour TriBase Reign 4, looking at the length of the shoe, we have a length of about 11.25 inches. Looking at the width of this model, we have a width of about 3.85 inches. And then when it comes to the upper volume in the TriBase Reign 4, you have a good amount of upper volume in this shoe. So if you do want to use your own custom orthotics or insoles, you should be okay doing so in the TriBase Reign 4. And when it comes to the taper of the toe box, this model is tapered, but it is a little bit more anatomical than prior iterations. So if you do want a little bit more forefoot width towards the tip of the shoe, the TriBase Reign 4 can be a decent option to explore. All right, so for my Nano 12 here in a size 10, when it comes to length, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width, so the base of the forefoot here, we have a width of about 4 inches, if not just under it. And then when it comes to the upper volume and taper in the shoe's toe box, this model has a fairly high upper volume, so you should be able to use your own custom orthotics or insoles if you want in the shoe. And then when it comes to the taper, this is a pretty anatomical taper. It does have a little bit of a taper, but it is wider than other models on the market. So I would describe this as a pretty anatomical taper. All right, looking at the length of my Altra Solsctice XT2 in a size 10, we have a length of about 11.125 inches. Looking at the width of this shoe, we have a width of about 4.125 inches, if not just at 4 inches. And then looking at the upper volume in the Altra Solsctice XT2, it is fairly high, and this does stretch out over time. So you do get a nice level of upper volume, especially the toe box of this shoe. And then looking at the shape, it is much more anatomical in nature, as this has one of the wider toe boxes in the game for training shoes. All right guys, that wraps up this cross-training shoe size guide. Hopefully this video was able to provide more context into different training shoes and how they will likely fit for your anatomical needs. If you have additional questions on any of the shoes featured in this video, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next one.